Dilemma Podcast, Jay Shapiro here. 10 years ago, right around this time, I was finishing up production on a film I talk about often, Islam and the Future of Tolerance, which featured a conversation between Sam Harris and Maajid Nawaz on their phone call, fight, and then ensuing conversation about the fraught topic of Islam and its contest with flourishing civilization, etc., and its role in violence and all this kinds of very taboo stuff. I'm still very proud of the film, but many of the names in the film, these are people like Sam, of course, and Maajid and Douglas Murray, Ayan Hirsi Ali, Yasmin Mohammed, many of the others. Over the ensuing decades since that film, I feel have gone into mental directions that are rather unfortunate. They probably think the same about me. But there's one name in that film who I remain friends with and has seen through some of the issues in a similar way that I have, especially after, of course, October 7th kind of tore a lot of these relationships actually totally apart. And that's Ali Rizvi. Ali Rizvi has become a friend. We've talked many times over the years. He loves political prognostication. He has an interesting story in his own right. He wrote a book about the same time as the film called The Atheist Muslim that I thought was quite good, that we're going to talk about a little bit here. But this conversation that you're about to see is much more casual. Ali and I do this kind of thing often privately, and I was like, why don't we just hit record on one of them and just talk, and I'll put it out just as sort of a 10-year retrospective of that film and of that meeting, and to talk a little bit about our journeys and what we think about things. I'm recording this intro right now at exactly the time that I think captives are being exchanged in Gaza. So just to mark sort of where that is. A lot of things obviously happening in the news. I'm not really a daily podcaster, news responding kind of guy. Hopefully you come to my show expecting something different, a more long view philosophical essays and different kind of takes and interviews. But this conversation, we do get into identity and some of these bigger kinds of kind of just fun issues, but it's a lot more casual. We're just sort of talking. It's not an interview. And hopefully you enjoy it. There's so much happening out there in the world right now that I'm fascinated in. And I want to dissect philosophically and psychologically, and it takes some time to do that. Obviously, all eyes on Gaza. But meanwhile, hopefully you've noticed, and I don't know how much sort of mainstream media is covering it, or even frankly alternative internet media at this point has congealed on the story. But these Gen Z protests in the world that I keep talking about have now really spread to Madagascar, which is in apparently the military there, or at least a unit is joining the protesters and seemingly trying to topple that government. So we have Madagascar, Kenya, Uganda, Nepal, of course. It's spreading this kind of energy. And in some ways, this is exactly after October 7th, and I was talking about the issue of Gaza kind of being the spark that launched a larger protest and conversation about colonialism or economics or whatever it's going to congeal as something bigger than a specific issue between Palestinians and Israelis. Maybe that's happening. So much more to say about that. I'm going to have a scholar on next month to talk about that issue and try to learn some more of the histories and what we're kind of seeing now. But there you go. So I also have just a quick announcement. I'm going to be on a little break for maybe 3 or 4-ish weeks after this episode. And then I do have one that I've already recorded coming out in a few days with Paul Jay. That's all about professional wrestling. So if you need a few more days to do the homework for that one, I just can't recommend the documentary more highly of Hitman Hart Wrestling with Shadows. It's a documentary that guest Paul Jay directed a while ago, over a decade ago, that still is insanely relevant. And I make the case in that episode that Donald J. Trump is not Donald J. Trump the man, but the president of the United States is literally a character who was written for him on the WWF. It's a fun episode. It's already recorded, so that's going to come out later this week. And then I'll be on this little break. But if you want to see me and discuss these things and hang around, I do have a membership program where at the last Sunday of every month, at 12 Eastern for about an hour, I want to hang out and meet you guys and hear what's on your mind. I can answer questions. Like we could get into a little bit more of sort of responding to my guests or what's on your mind or people I should be talking to or criticisms or whatever we want to do. That's going to be on Zoom this time. So if you sign up for a membership or you go to the link for the live event coming up, you'll see in the description for members only an invite to that Zoom room, and I hope to see you there. Of course, if you can't make it live, send in your questions early, either on comments there as a member, or you could email me, and I'm sure you know how to figure out ways to find me. I find your messages if you're a member on this YouTube thing. So that'll be really fun, and frankly, if you like this kind of conversation that I'm having with Ali, which is a little more informal and conversational and just sort of off the cuff, I think that's kind of what the Hangouts will be. But yeah, I have some life stuff and some writing stuff to get through in the next couple weeks, so I probably won't put anything out until the second or third week of November, actually. But you'll see me in the membership Hangout room, and that'll be available archived for members. So I'll just let this one play. This is me and Ali Rizvi. I feel like we'll probably do more of these because Ali and I just like talking to each other, even though we don't agree on everything. We like how each other thinks, yeah, so enjoy just me and Ali Rizvi kind of riffing on Islam and the future of tolerance, revisited a decade later. And then in that spirit, it's so casual that when he logged on the room to start recording, he saw the record behind me and immediately called it out. So you'll see we'll just jump right into sort of friendly banter and just sort of let the raw conversation go from there. So enjoy. The thing is, I always choose a different vinyl for everyone. By the way, it's going to look like you have great eyes because it's my good camera. It's like out of focus. So everyone's going to, well, you could recognize the pattern.
Yeah,
And for you, I chose this one. I don't know why. Just because I figured you would love it. And that was
it
true.
is. It's well, I really like that. I like the fact that um you do that for different guests. But the thing is, I think I spent a good part of maybe 4 months just constantly listening to that double album. I remember like it was in med school and I was studying the whole time. I'd be studying and just be listening to
Yeah.
this thing getting that was around the time when an album was an album and it wasn't just a collection of 3 minute commercials and you'd hear
Yes.
it was like from beginning to end.
I
It
think this is
wasn't
the
a
perfect
single
way.
thing.
I think I'm gonna leave this in just so we age ourselves because it's relevant to the way we're going to talk about this. That Ali
Yeah.
Rizvi, I'll say it now because I turned the mic on, was recognized the album behind me as Smashing Pumpkins' "Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness," which I think was 1996 or
So,
four.
yeah, something like that. Yeah.
But we,
So
in our formative teenage years, anyway, it ages us because I'm framing this conversation as sort of an Islam and the future of tolerance decade later revisited. So it's a film that I made that featured Sam Harris and Maajid Nawaz in conversation. I'm still quite proud of the film. I rewatched it again just a couple weeks ago, even
yeah.
though I feel like, I disagree. And I disagreed at the time. We're going to get into this stuff with a lot of the arguments in it. But I feel like it was a really successful artistic rendering of a conversation that was important at the time and a time capsule. And just about every face in the film who was at the end, including Douglas Murray, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Yasmin Mohammed, a friend, and others, October 7th really just derailed our conversations to such a point that we'll probably never find each other again. But you are the one exception to that. And so I do want to discuss maybe your journey over the last 10 years, my journey over the last 10 years, and then react a little bit to the news because I want to let everyone know we're recording this on Friday evening-ish my time, morning-ish
That's right.
your time. A ceasefire was brokered and signed by Donald Trump this morning or yesterday. He did not win the Nobel Prize, which is the
No, he
news
did not. Oh,
a couple of hours ago, which makes me most
did you
scared that he's
see?
going to tear it up. Yeah.
No, did you see? Actually, the Venezuelan like the human rights activist who did win the Nobel Prize. He
Yeah.
actually tweeted about her back in January, I
Well, it's
think. And
super
he
interesting
like
because yeah.
positively praising her and everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but he's
So
now going to be really vindictive that she got the prize and he didn't get it. So anyway. The thing
yeah,
I was like, just give him the damn prize so he doesn't tear up the ceasefire deal, so we could just get
yeah,
to
he's gonna be pissed off
yeah.
anyway. I'm sorry, I don't know. What are the language? Try not to swear or try to,
You
I mean,
could swear. I
pissed
think
off.
people can handle pissed off.
All right. Oh yeah,
If
pissed
we're-
off is yeah, I can't. I don't even know why I asked that.
but anyway,
But I want to say one thing.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
I am. We're talking about aging ourselves. I am older than you. So I just
Well,
wanted to put it out there. I
you
think
look great.
that's pretty clear. But yeah, it has been time, and I think the thing that was common, you did Islam and the Future of Tolerance, which I was in briefly at the end, and I still think it's a fantastic documentary, and if you
Yeah.
haven't seen it, you should see it. And then I wrote my book in
Mhm.
2016. It came out. It's called The Atheist Muslim. And the one thing that I think both of those things had in common, maybe one of the reasons that you and I are talking now and the others are not, is that both of those things were about having conversations, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote my book with the intention that I grew up in a Muslim family and we had some sort of like moderate Muslims, and then we had like progressive liberal Muslims, and we had conservative Muslims, and those were the two tracks. But it just wasn't an option to not have the faith. You had to subscribe
Yeah.
to the ideology. That just was not an option. And if you did even mention that you couldn't, we know what happened. We saw Salman Rushdie, Charlie
Mhm.
Hebdo, the cartoons, all the blasphemy laws. So there was a he just so I just wanted to sort of start the conversation saying, hey, I am Muslim by identity. I was raised that way. Yeah, I do the Ramadan fasts. I still celebrate Eid. I celebrate Christmas and Diwali too, because anytime there's a holiday and food, my
Yeah.
daughter and I are there. So there was it was just, and the point was to start a conversation that we should be able to talk about this. That was
Yeah.
a goal. The goal wasn't to mass convert everybody to atheism or anything like that. It's just that, we're part of this, like, the Jewish community. We got secular Jews. Everybody shows up at, any of the events, and everybody kind of gets along. They argue, they have heated disagreements, but the community aspect is still intact. And that was a goal to
Yeah.
have the conversation. And Islam and the Future of Tolerance was similar. I think your
Yeah.
documentary, which I kind of preferred to the book,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
um, is because it sort of framed it and it stepped outside of it as well. Was also about that. It was just about having those conversations and being able to have them. And
Yeah.
now I think we are in this state of for all. Everybody talks about censorship, and you have all these people talking about like I've been canceled, nobody wants to hear me speak, and yet they're saying it on Fox News and they're saying it on Twitter and they're saying it on all these other places. Like I don't think the platforms have been. I don't think we've had more free speech at any time
Hmm.
in history as we do right now.
Yeah.
So
Though it may be threatened and coming to an end, but that's not an end. I don't think it's
that's it. Yeah.
endable, but yeah.
Yeah.
But I
No,
mean,
and we're gonna get into that. Yeah.
yeah, no, but that's a great way to start it. So yeah, for the audience who doesn't know, Ali, you grew up in Saudi Arabia, and when did you come to? Was it Canada, straight from Saudi Arabia? Or
Yeah.
yeah,
So I grew up in multiple places.
mm,
Born in, I grew up in, I was born in Pakistan, and then
Pakistan.
grew up mainly in Libya, and then Saudi Arabia, Pakistan. And then I actually came to North America, moved to North America the first time when I was 24 years old. So I was
Yeah,
a fully grown adult
yeah, yeah,
when
yeah,
I moved here. And it was 2 years before 9/11 when I permanently
yeah.
moved.
Well,
So.
let me start by giving you the mirror of that because that was great. So, like, hopefully people remember the context of that film and that outreach. And at the time, this is a time when people like Dave Rubin were offering seats to people like you to talk, and maybe those were
Blurred
the
my
only kind
book.
of what's that?
He blurbed my book. It's on the back of my book. It's
Yeah, and
because
so like
yeah.
these figures have become what they've become. But I just want to contextualize this for an audience who's like rightfully shocked by these names. Is the a big concern at that time, especially in your book title and the effort of your book is perfectly encapsulates it, is this kind of minority within minority concern, right? It was maybe there was this impulse to see sort of in liberal circles that Islam is like the underdog and getting beaten up by the West. And so you kind of have to just like root for them in some way. But what about people like Ali? What about, gays in the Muslim world? What about atheists in the Muslim world who don't get treated well and everything? And so isn't that against our liberal principles to stand up for universal human rights values? Aren't these people at the most vulnerable risk of this kind of conversation? And that is, that's a genuine concern, right? That's a genuine concern when you too cleanly split the world into oppressor and oppressed. I've talked a lot about this on my show, right? Like, I'm sure we're going to get into it, and the hatred or distaste for something like Zionism should not lead you to root for the Ayatollah in Iran and forget about the totalitarian theology that he represents, right? This is Hamid Dabashi and I talked about this. You could walk and chew gum at the same time. You could root against Zionism and Islamism at the same time, or jihadism at the same time. In fact, I think it's crucial, and then we'll get into it historically. Obviously, my argument is Zionism is the domino that has to fall first. We could argue about that all day. But to your point in the mirror of what's happened to this conversation, because I think that's still an important one. And frankly, the mistreatment, the radio silence for people like you or Ayaan Hirsi Ali, for as problematic as she is or was, radicalizes some people. Maybe Yasmin Mohammed, our mutual friend. Like, it does piss you off to be like, what about me? Like, I got abused and I got mistreated, and you're saying in my family I would be kicked out for saying I'm an atheist. Or, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but to represent that cause. To represent that cause. And you're like, well, and everybody's rooting for this thing that is my oppressor, even though they might be oppressed by a bigger, badder wolf in the West, whatever. That radicalizes some people in order to sort of turn darker, to be like, you know what? Like, I'm gonna go so far that I'm gonna root for Zionists now or something. But to the mirror of that conversation. So meanwhile, you're growing up with that upbringing. I'm growing up with a very different identity. And the reason I loved your book so much, and probably, again, you're right, why we are able to have these conversations, is even in the title, The Atheist Muslim, which was great. It's an aspirational identity where you're saying, like, this should be a thing, right? Like, this, I'm fighting for this to be a thing. And I grew up in this very strange Jewish thing, which all the time I get people, haters, I'm sure, who are commenting on me. Ever since I debated Coleman, I have like a little Zionist bot that follows me. But some of them are like, you're not even Jewish, get out of here, whatever. And I just always ask them, I'm like, is Judaism a religion or an ethnicity? And I just want them to tell me, because if they say it's a religion, I'm like, cool, I'm not Jewish, I'm out. I don't believe any of this stuff. I'm a pure atheist. I'm what Ali Rizvi's book was supposed to be about. But if it's an ethnicity, what am I? Am I Jewish now? Can you kick me out? Like, what's going on here? So I grew up in this very strange other kind of minority within minorities that wasn't defined by your book. Famously, you could be an atheist Jew. There's a lot of atheist Jews who identify that way, and they seem to have no problem.
Rabbis, like there's rabbis who are atheists. So
and this is an interesting thing, maybe about the history of that particular religion for whatever reason. But being an anti-Zionist Jew, particularly in America, that was the minority. I was the mirror of you being like, what about me? And okay, maybe they're not coming after me to kill me or hang me or whatever, and that happens in some places in Egypt or whatever was happening there. But there's an equivalent of it that's just as, you're kicked out of your family and shunned and shamed and called a self-hating Jew and sidelined and all this kind of stuff. And as you see now, actually can be quite dangerous. As just a little piece of argumentation that Sam used to use, this person that is midpoint between us in some ways at that point, he would always, I think Bill Maher even used the same thing. He would use this analogy of the Book of Mormon was that show on Broadway that he would bring up all the time, being like, the Book of Mormon makes fun of Mormonism on Broadway. And what does the Mormon church do? They don't, call it jihad and kill everyone. They take out an ad in the playbill advertising Mormonism. And just imagine if they had put on the Quran or the Book of Islam, how dangerous it would be. And I always thought, okay, fine, fair point. Now imagine putting on the Book of Zionism. Go ahead and do a Broadway at any of those times where you have Theodore Herzl acting like a maniac and you have all these Zionists dancing around. Imagine how quickly the ADL comes and shuts you down and puts you in genuine danger. So the religion was always this Israelism, Zionism thing that was my fight. And so I felt just as isolated and shunned or whatever in the same mirror way. And then I'll let you respond. But I don't feel tempted to go on a show with a bunch of Islamists and jihadists to share my story and talk about how we should go crush the Zionists together because, aren't they so bad? Like, no, I can. And luckily, history is replete with plenty of people who walked the same path as I did, who are Muslim and Jewish, right? The PFLP I've been bringing up all the time, and Ghassan Kanafani, all the leftist groups, which frankly were the biggest threat to the system in the Muslim world, which were neither Islamist nor or fully atheist or whatever. Maybe some of them were atheist or whatever they would identify as Muslims, but you know, their enemy was what they called the reactionary Muslims, who, like the Ayatollah and everyone else in the Middle East after Israel's founding, and the Zionists. Like, there's a model for this, there's room for this, and so that's sort of my frustration that's grown over the last 10 years, and I'm sure everyone else has seen the same hypocrisy from the same group of people we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot there, but I think that the one thing that I was thinking about when you're saying all that is just there's this idea of ideological loyalty, that everybody's, it's, you're loyal to your spouse, your child, everything. That's a different, but this idea of being loyal to an ideology, which means that you're going to be accepting it no matter what. There's no room for modification or any kind of evolution of that idea is has always been bizarre. And I think that one of the reasons that you and I are having this conversation, if we were born in different parts of the world, we wouldn't even be talking, right? I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't know about your existence, or I'd probably hate you without even knowing who you are, and vice versa. But the fact that we're having this conversation is because that we don't really subscribe to just this idea of ideological loyalty, the
Yeah.
idea of being loyal to an ideology and conflating that with what your identity is. And this is an issue. So both of us there are birth identities that all of us
Mm-hmm.
have. You can be white or black or brown or Jewish, Muslim. I mean, these are birth identities. You're born into religion. You kind of stay in that, and or nationality, right? You're European, American, East Asian, Indian, in my case, Pakistani, whatever. And when we default to using that as a source of pride, you know, I'm I'm a proud Pakistani person. I'm a proud this. I'm proud that. And these are identities that we didn't really work to
Yeah.
earn. Like we didn't really earn them. They're very easy to latch onto. Uh, when you do work to earn a certain identity, like you're a filmmaker, you are a cultural anti-Zionist, Jewish person, who is also, you're whatever you are. Like in my case, I'm a father. I'm also a cancer pathologist. There's many things that an author, the things that we work to earn. When you take pride in those things that you actually put effort into it, you're a little bit humbler, and you do
Hmm.
end up connecting with other people, who have sort of these acquired identities that they put effort into that transcend what their birth identities are. But when you start taking pride in, like, just the default stuff that you didn't really work to earn, and you feel that was just granted to you, that's when I think all the shit really hits the fan. All of your, your wars and your conflicts and your issues, tribalism kind of comes from that. Like these are people who are latching on to identities that they didn't really
Hmm.
earn
Yeah.
through work and personal development and reflection and just evolution of developing some kind of life philosophy. So it's hard right now. Identity is a really really big topic.
Yeah.
I think of it a little differently in the sense that, like I told you, I grew up in Libya, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan. These are all culturally completely different um, uh, societies, yet they're all Muslim majority. That Islam that they practice in different places in these different countries is completely different. And you know, I just found it. I never really found an identity. So I talk like this because I went to an American school in Saudi Arabia,
Mhm.
barely interacted with any Saudis, lived there for 12 years, didn't learn any Arabic because they just keep the foreigners and the locals isolated, like they're separated from each other. And you don't interact with them. They don't want at that time at least. Now it's very different. I don't even recognize it now, but back at that time they wanted to keep their own society pure and away from the
Yeah.
expatriates. So there So I learned. So I learned how to speak English, and I went to an American school with people from 80 different countries, mostly American and Canadian. I wasn't Saudi, I knew I wasn't American, even though I spoke like this and my entire education was American. Um, and I knew that I wasn't really when I later went to Pakistan, because I thought the whole time I was like, "Ah, I'm Pakistani." But then when I went to Pakistan for like some more schooling, I realized I'm not really Pakistani either. Like nobody,
Yeah.
everybody thought I was this like foreign kid who was that they just looked down on, people who've lived overseas. And there's a term, ABCD, which means
Mm.
American born, uh, I think American born something.
You need the C and the D.
Daisy means yeah, like, I can't even remember, but that's so they're not considered the real thing. So I didn't really get that identity.
Yeah.
I wasn't Libyan. I wasn't in any of those places. So when I came to Canada, and I wasn't even in Canada, I was 24 years old. Obviously, I'd never lived in Canada before. Um, and now I'm in Canada. Then I went for residency in the US. It still wasn't American or Canadian. I became a Canadian national eventually, naturalized. And even now, like, people don't see me
Yeah.
as Canadian, but Canada is really the closest. So I just thought this identity stuff is bullshit.
Yeah.
I thought it was a plus that I don't have any kind of loyalty to any of these birth identities, that this is our country, this is our land, it's our soil, these are our people. I don't think of really anything. If I was gonna ask, who my people are, I would probably say, you or our mutual, friend, and just eccentric. He's a fun guy, Mookie Spitz, like for instance, like people
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
consider those guys like I'd say, okay, these are my people.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. So I think that's one thing just to kind of frame this entire conversation, the ability to when you break out of this idea of birth identity and ideological loyalty or tribal loyalty, then you're able to see other people's points of view. So you were born in a family that was very sort of pro-Zionist, and you questioned it.
Hmm.
I was born in a family in a society surrounding Saudi Arabia that's very anti-Zionist,
Hmm.
right? And I wanted to understand what Zionism is and what it means. I found out that it means different things to different people, and I
Yeah.
have, you know, I share a lot of your views on it, but I did speak to, one person who told me he's like, and he's also not a hardcore Zionist, he's kind of in the middle on it. But he said, a lot of these people who escaped, like after World War II, they left, they escaped, and they came to Israel. And that whole idea of Zionism, that's the reason they exist today. So the way that these kids are raised, their kids were
Yeah.
raised after that, they're taught, you're only as good as what you've been taught, right? They've been taught since they were kids that it's because of Zionism and you came to Israel that our family's still alive. Your entire generation would have been wiped out. Okay,
Yeah.
our entire people would have been wiped out, and it's because of this that you exist today. So if you tell somebody who's been raised that way and taught that, and of course it's a partially true account of what happened historically. There are other aspects to it, but we only get the side that we're told. And so, someone like that grows up, they integrate in a society like in the American society, Canadian society, they're all fitting in, they're doing their thing. And then suddenly everyone starts uh, talking about how Zionism is evil. And they're like, wow, Zionism is the reason I exist.
Yeah.
Now you're against my existence.
Yeah.
And so it's a, and again, I'm not saying that that's a correct view or it's an informed view, but when you listen to people, there are people who think that way. And I respect that. I understand it. And that's where the conversation starts, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
start of the conversation. Unfortunately, that's where a lot of people think the conversation ends, and then it causes conflict. So that's one view, and then there's the other view, which we've talked about a lot too. So whether we agree with things or not, I think it's good to understand the other side. Like I'm pro-choice, but I do respect the pro-life argument. Like
Hmm.
not necessarily the religious side of it or anything, but even there's a secular argument for people who are pro-life. viability of the fetus and everything. And there's disagreements about it, but I respect where it's coming from. The intention, I don't think that all of those people are anti-women or anything like
Yeah.
that. But I respect, and there's other arguments like, that I don't really have a lot of respect for. But in some cases, these are complex topics, they're complex conversations, they're rooted in really complex just phenomena of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
identity development, ideological development, and how we think, where we're raised, the whole idea of free will, how much free will do we really have? Um, so anyway, that was a
Yeah. Yeah.
long answer, but
No, no, no. I
yeah,
mean, the identity thing is crucial. I've been thinking a lot about it lately too, obviously, and its relationship to land, which is something maybe I have a book in me one day because I think there's something there rather than nation or state. I talked about this on my show as well, but the human relationship to home and land and dignity and a sort of existential, almost spiritual feeling that we belong, I think is
yeah,
deeply rooted in even just that word rooted in land and particular land, but in really complex ways that can become really dangerous. But I do feel that there's something there. There's a lot there to talk about. But I wanted to ask you, just given your where you were, if you could remember on October 7th and how you thought about things versus now and how it's changed, because people who know our trajectories can fill in the names of 15 people who I've sort of alluded to already. And
yeah,
like you may think that this is they're all going to think like I'm a narcissistic asshole for saying this. But after 2 years of seeing this, I was surprised that really almost nobody, except for you, had kind of been like, I think you may have had a point, right? Like people entrenched even deeper. But I'm curious how that day and the ensuing sort of years maybe changed your mind at all, or where you're thinking particularly about these big topics of freedom and Islam and even Judaism or Zionism and notions, particularly in the philosophical sense of peace versus justice, which is something that I've just failed constantly to succeed with people like Coleman, obviously,
yeah.
certainly Sam. Like they're incapable of digesting or even entertaining a justice oriented moral system rather than a peace one. And I could really unpack that. But first, I want you
Yeah,
to sort of get into
I've,
what you're
I've
thinking.
I've thought about that a lot, the peace and justice, and
Yeah.
we'll get into that. I mean,
You blurbed my
there's a
book too,
lot
by
that
the way, which I have a date for
yeah,
in May of 2026. It's coming out. So you were one of the first people I sent it to read, and I loved your blurb. I'll just
yeah.
put that out, which is a lot about peace and justice and history. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and that's something I think a lot about. So peace and justice, and I just want to like say this at a time. It is a challenge
Oh yeah.
um, to have both peace and justice. Okay, so a lot of times
Oh yeah.
it's impossible. Generally, throughout history, and this is at least my view of it, is anytime you've had peace, like in Ireland or in like some of these other big conflicts that have been solved people have had on every side, and it's tougher for the people who were more oppressed, obviously, is that they've had to, you can't always get retrospective justice. You
No,
can't
no, no.
take
You
people
never
who've been
can.
killed and bring them back alive, and so you have to give up on some of the aspects of justice
Absolutely.
that you need, and yeah, there's all the philosophical stuff about restorative justice versus retributive, and all that. But I think there's the idea of just it's a very difficult. I mean, it's easy for I guess us to say that you got to give up some idea of justice to be able to get peace, but unfortunately, that's the only way it can really happen. But I mean, we can get into that
Absolutely.
later.
Yeah.
You asked about October 7th and where I was. I'd just woken up and I had I was looking at my phone. I usually look at the news and emails and things. When I wake up, I know it's a bad habit, but still, it's the first thing I do. And I saw that this was happening. And at first, honestly, I just thought it was another, we'd seen this. There'd already been four wars in Gaza. Hamas would fire rockets, Israel would respond or Israel would do something, and then Hamas would respond, and so on. So I thought it was like a regular thing. I don't really do reels and TikTok and all that. So I didn't see a lot of what was actually happening in real time. Um, but I just thought they got through, and this was another it took a while for me to realize that this was a lot more serious. The death toll hadn't really come out, and unfortunately, any news that comes out of there is just heavily, both sides say all kinds of things, and you don't know what to believe. I knew that, and this is another thing. You're also kind of a prisoner of your knowledge if you understand and if you know the history of it. You know that it's complicated. You know how Hamas came into power. I was always I've always been of the view that if you're pro-Palestinian, you can't fully be pro-Hamas, because I know enough about how people suffered under Hamas, like before any of October 7th. They suffered under Hamas, and they were already suffering with the occupation with Israel. So they were kind of just getting beat up on all sides. So wasn't really a fan of Hamas for a while. There's also, the religious aspect of it. I mean, they are, very overtly a jihadist group, and this is why it's really complicated. Judaism, is it a religion or an ethnicity, like you said? And if it's a religion, is it like a religious state? If it's an ethnicity, is Israel an ethno state? That part of it is all confused, but it's also apparently a secular democracy,
Yeah.
right? So it's a Jewish majority state, ethno state, religious state that is also a secular democracy, and then you have your you know then you have the Palestinians, which are genuinely oppressed. They've been occupied. The settlement expansion happening that there's no secular justification for, like none.
Mhm.
It's purely biblical, right? Or from the Torah or the Old Testament. And there's really no, it's just this idea that this is divinely allotted real estate for us, right? So that, to both of us as, I guess, secular people, atheists, whatever you want to call it, just doesn't yeah, that doesn't really resonate with me at all. And then on the other side, you have these sort of like occupied, oppressed people in Palestine who and in Gaza and the West Bank. And then there's this mixed element of religious jihadism there, right? That blurs that whole story. And
Yeah.
it's hard to tell what people think, because you may not be ideologically aligned with the religious jihadism or anything, but at the same time, you do want freedom. And if you have a government that's coming in and providing you with some rights, and that's
Mhm.
one of the tiny, tiny amount of choices that you have. And you may look like you're aligned with everything that they do, but maybe you're not. Maybe they're just coming and, giving your family some social services, or giving your kids sandwiches, or,
Yeah.
and that's helping, and that's why you go and vote for them. I mean, these things are very, very complicated,
Yeah.
and we don't. And I remember talking to Sam Harris about this. We had him on the Secular Jihadist podcast, and okay, he would cite polls, and which is great. I mean, polls are the only way you can really understand what's going on in society. I get it,
Sort
but
of. Yeah.
yeah, sort of. And he said that there's these polls that, I don't know, 80% of people in Pakistan think that apostates should be killed. I was like, yeah, I agree with that. Like, I think that most of them do say that. I think that
They
poll's
say
very.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
And if I go into my family, my extended family, where there were a lot of religious people, I'd ask them this. I'm like, do you think apostates should be killed? They're like, yeah, they should be killed. They agree. They would say yes
Mhm.
on that poll. I'm like, well, you're sitting here talking to me. We hang out, we go for ice cream, we do all these things. Do you think I should be killed? I mean, I don't believe in this stuff. I had another cousin who was like that too. I was like, he doesn't believe in it. And they're like, no, no, you guys are different. You're still a
Yeah.
part of the family. You're still part of, and there's a nuance to it. Like these are people who, they say, they defend the daughter of Muhammad, their prophet Muhammad, to a 9-year-old girl. Aisha was his youngest wife. Well, literally, yeah, clearly his youngest wife. And they would defend that. Uh, and then you'd ask them, like, your daughter turned 9. Would you get her married to the prophet or the mom? They're like, yeah, of course they wouldn't. They would
Yeah.
never dream of it. So it's human beings are complicated. Cognitive dissonance is just it's a feature of
Yeah.
just us as people, right?
Yeah.
Even they tried to model AI after the human brain, and it's got
Yeah.
the same thing. Hallucinates, confabulates, does all kinds of things. We're seeing that it's almost like a reflection of us. So
Yeah.
I thought like I thought about it in October 7th when it was happening and all this. I saw then the reports of the beheaded babies, and I was like, that's insane. That even Hamas, if they would do that, that's crazy. I I would expect, I actually, in all honesty, I would expect ISIS to do it. I think
Hmm.
that a group like ISIS would do that. I think they would go and, they famously took Yazidi sex slaves and everything. I would not doubt that for a second. I'd probably think that is very plausible. But even these jihadist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, a little different, from ISIS. ISIS is a little different from Al Qaeda. Like all these, they're not all
Yeah,
the
they're all
same.
different. Yeah.
They're all different. So I saw these things and I saw that there was no response. And then the numbers and the death tolls, and then I was like, okay, wow, this is a really serious issue,
Yeah.
and this is going to be a problem. I knew Netanyahu was in a lot of legal trouble. I knew he diverted like troops from the Gaza border over to to do his own thing. So I was 100% sure that he's going to use this. I
Hmm.
knew that there would be, I mean, and this is stuff that we talked about way before. There'd be this conflation of, presenting anything that's critical of Israel as anti-Semitism. Anybody who supports a Palestinian cause is pro-Hamas and pro-terrorism and, Jew killers or whatever it is. So I just knew there was could be just a torrential amount of bullshit that
Yeah.
was going to emerge from it. And as the same thing, I always say that there's two sides to this conflict, and that's the leaders. And to me that includes Netanyahu and Hamas. And I don't think, I know people say there's a moral, it's not a moral equivalence. Um, After the WCK
Mm.
hit, that clearly targeted hit, cars
Yeah.
like mile hard with the logo clearly on top, killing aid workers, killing 200 journalists, not allowing any journalists even to shoot from the border, right?
Yeah.
Which counters their whole claim that we're doing it for safety. The starvation part of it,
Hmm.
you know, well, the kid on the cover he had cerebral palsy. Well, yeah, but he was also, kids with cerebral palsy don't all look like that. Like they only
Yeah.
look like that. They've been starved. So um, uh, all of that, I don't think that I totally see them as morally equivalent, you know,
Yeah.
and I that I you know, and maybe I don't know. I just think it's I thought that before October 7th. I think about
Mm.
it now. People are like, well, nothing justifies October 7th. I don't think anything justified whatever was happening before October 7th either, or
Yeah.
anything that happened after October 7th. I do think that they had to respond. I think it was horrible. Um, I know that there's disputes about what actually happened, and were women raped, were babies. I mean, there's a video footage of everything. Um, but I feel like I'm not a fan of those conversations necessarily. I know that there's a lot of
Yeah. Yeah.
misinformation, and it is important to counter the misinformation at times, but I just think that, we once we agree that that was a, a it's not the right thing. It's not something that I would support anybody doing. I get the nuances. I That it's sort of inevitable when
Yeah.
you have peaceful protesters coming out and they're also gunned down by the IDF, and it's happened in the past. You do peaceful protests, you speak out, you do everything. It doesn't really work, and then you have a desperate people, and the pot's boiling over, and things like this will happen. So it's complicated, but I just don't expect everybody to think of it that way with, sound bites and Twitter posts and
Yeah.
you know
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Well, I mean, yeah, that was. We could get into the justice and peace thing if you want from like a
yeah.
philosophical angle, or we could stay with, because like I don't want to. I'll cut this part out, but I don't know. I wasn't gonna sort of just pick on Sam and these people, because it's less like, I don't know if you've been following sort of Sam's descent into this kind of madness, but when and I don't know if maybe you've been disappointed that the fact that his post October 7th trajectory was to be radicalized by the Holocaust of all things,
Yeah.
and to just put out a waterfall of misinformation. I've had these long private conversations. Now he doesn't talk to me, where he knew nothing, literally nothing about the history of, even for someone so obsessed with Islam, you think he'd be interested in the context, historical context, political context in which modern Islamism was birthed. Something like the coup in '53 in Iran of Mossadegh. Like, if any Sam Harris
Yeah.
fans are listening, the names that don't appear in that book or in my film, like Mossadegh or Nehru or Nasser or anyone who basically would shatter, let alone what you think about Islam and Islamism and jihadism, but shatter this,
Narrative. Yeah.
yeah, the narrative that the West is interested in the liberation of the poor people of the world and spreading democracy, is just garbage, and history will dissuade you of that
Yeah.
mental disease very quickly. And it seems that someone like Sam and many of those people in the film just can't have that disease dissuaded, because they need this kind of good guy bad guy narrative intact, where they can't find this very obvious middle ground to be skeptical of Western capitalist, neo-imperial, neo-colonial projects, which are just so obvious when you study history, and the reactionary Islamism of it. And so, the fact that he puts out a call for people who disagree with him, and I think his next three guests are like David Frum, Douglas Murray, and Ann Applebaum, is like, okay, that guy's not coming back from this. He's just a goner mentally.
Yeah.
But on a personal level, it was a sort of a sad thing. It was a lost friendship I had with him and his wife and everything like that. And so I don't want to just beat up on these people. I do want to try to assess kind of how our trajectory over the last decade, and maybe how we, what we think happens from here, or if the conversation can sort of be rescued in a way. Because like you
Yeah.
said, we were both interested in conversation, and maybe that's why we connected, that there was much, much more to talk about here than, what was sort of out in the mainstream. And then, yeah, I don't know, maybe people got too talked out, and, now they just have chosen their corners. I'm not sure.
Yeah. One of the things, and so just getting to like have I followed? I haven't really followed it that
Yeah.
much. I know that um, during one of the previous conflicts, I think in 2014, written an article at HuffPost, which was actually widely translated and written. It was called
Mm.
Seven Things to Consider the Middle East Conflict. And I sort of, and he had a podcast that he really liked the article. He shared it everywhere. And then he did a podcast episode called Why I Don't Criticize Israel, or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, where he talked about how he doesn't believe in the ethno state and everything. And it was a more sort of like measured position that I thought was reasonable. I didn't completely 100% agree with
Yeah.
everything. I don't think on this conflict any two people, including us, is going to agree on every aspect of it. But um, after I think that the biggest there's two things for me that just discredit people after October 7th. Number one is first, when they say uh, they characterize any protesters as pro-Hamas. They just
Yeah.
label them. They're like, okay, these university things. I mean, there's pro-Palestinians. There's people who want, Palestinians. Oh, these are all pro-Hamas people. Um, so that's on. Anytime I hear that, I'm like, that's just absolutely ridiculous. That's assuming that that was the whole idea that we were against. I'm a brown person raised in a Muslim background, so am I pro-Islam? And I'm not, right? But I do have Muslim friends and I have Muslim family and all of that. So that's one thing. The other thing is when they make the World War II comparisons.
Mm.
They're like, well, the Nazis, we had
Yeah.
to fight the Nazis and things like that. Yeah, but the Jews were not occupying Germany. They weren't forcibly expanding settlements in Germany and ruling
Yeah.
over them and not giving them the right to vote and not to. I mean, that's not what the Jewish people in Germany were doing in World War II. It's not. So whenever I hear that comparison, when they talk about, well, this is just like World War II, it's not. There's been a 75-year occupation of these people who have sort of a ceremonial selection of their leadership.
Yeah.
It comes in, they've had embargoes, they don't have the right to vote for the real authority that rules their lives. I mean, there's a whole displacement and the whole founding of it. It's completely when people say either of those things on this side specifically, when they characterize all pro-Palestinian people as pro-Hamas, or when they make those World War II
Yeah.
comparisons, I just kind of tune out because I'm not,
Well,
that whole premise is so poorly
if I
thought
could
out.
interrupt it or steelman it a little more in the worst possible way for them, frankly, I just did this on that last one with Barry Weiss and my
Yeah.
Rashomon effect thing, but it's what's so frustrating about that particular avenue. I mean, you remember, I think it was like 2 days after October 7th, and then the UN Israeli ambassador was like wearing a yellow star on his arm.
Oh
Remember
yeah.
that? Yeah. I mean, it's like it's so what that is about is the religion. When I say the religion I was brought up in, I'm really talking post-Holocaust American Judaism is about the Holocaust. It's about the Shoah. It's about the 6 million that perished, and it's about anti-Semitism is the devil, and
Yeah.
it's almost supernatural. And this is what, for someone like Sam Harris, he is a deeply religious devotee to this version of things. Like we talk about
Mhm.
ideological, he is completely ensnared by this ideology, which is wild that he got radicalized by it. But it's that anti-Semitism is almost a supernatural cosmic evil that has always existed, and the Jews are expelled everywhere they go because they're Jewish, and the world just can't sort of sustain them, and they'll never have a safe place to be. And this thing, it never fully disappears. It just goes down to really
Yeah.
low levels, and then it resurfaces with a new face and a new name somewhere else. So the Nazis weren't the first. There was the Spanish who kicked out the Jews. There was Haman in the Persian Empire. He's in our Torah. You should know him. There was the Pharaoh in Egypt. These are all the same devil with a new mask. The Arabs are just a new version of it. So when you adopt that ideology, and that's
Mhm.
and if we're caught off guard, it'll finally kill us and expel us like it's always fully wanted to do. We'll just finally be rid of the Jews. This devil will win. And we just can't let that happen. And so that's an unfalsifiable ideology, like all religions. It's a God that you can't disprove. So any hatred, and no matter what you do, it was bound to come out. Anything you're doing in the world is preemptively trying to keep that devil at bay. So we're building settlements in order to, like, I don't know, push out or have safety or expansion, or it doesn't matter what we did to the Palestinians because that devil is still there. They were going to do this anyway. Everything we're doing is just out of some sort of preemptive sort of first strike
Yeah.
against this devil. And after the Shoah, we just need to do it really aggressively. Never again become warriors. We were caught off guard by being too meek. We're never going to let it happen again. So that's when they're bringing up the World War II analogy. They're not interested in what you just said, because they'll say, oh, it doesn't matter, the devil hates you no matter what. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what you did to the devil. The devil's the devil. The devil hates you. So sure, call it this, call it that, or whatever. But one thing that actually gave me a tiny bit of hope from this crowd, and I still get it in my comments sometimes, was Sam, who we're bringing up, in the early days after October 7th, when I can confirm for anybody listening, knows literally nothing about the history. I can confirm this through literally nothing, but is trying to, I think, educate himself as best he can. Writes, I think along with his wife, but the five myths about Israel, which I think all five were wrong, but whatever. Some of them were subjective. It was like myth number one, they're committing a genocide, and he quibbled on the thing of genocide. Myth number two was something about proportional response. Anyway, he didn't talk to an international lawyer or have any informed sort of experts on this. But the one that really mattered, that I was like, that is a good sign, is, I think it was myth number 4 or 5 or whatever. It was that Israel is a colonial project, something written like that. And he's calling it a myth. And I was like, fascinating. Because that one is not coming from the mouths of the anti-Zionists like me. This is not
Yeah.
in dispute. This is, everyone right now can find it, Herzl's diary. It's 1,600 pages long, and just control F the word colonization or colonial, and you'll get like 300 hits. You could do the same thing with every single Zionist who basically worked on the project from 1897 until 1948. this was a colonial project, a unique one, as all colonial projects are. But this
Mhm.
is like not a historical dispute, right? Like they're working with Balfour. If you don't think that guy's a colonialist, I have a book here that I'd love for you to read by Balfour.
Yeah.
They're reaching out to Cecil Rhodes saying we have a colonial thing here. Like this was not this. This is 100%
Yeah.
a project of colonialization. I think is the fair way to put it. And now, yes, it's a
Mhm.
unique one, as they all are. Like I said, one of the unique
Well, I
factors
mean,
is
yeah,
that
they're all unique in their own
yeah,
yeah, all of
they
them.
all have
Yeah.
their own unique features. This one has a particular uniqueness of, where the Jews don't have a homeland to return to. It's not exactly like the French in Algeria. It's a little like America, who were also people who were, a lot of them
Native,
expelled
yeah.
from Europe, the Native American situation. Like we could find analogies, but they are all a little imperfect analogies, but it's all colonial in the sense. I talked to Michael Sawyer about Malcolm X, who wrote about this and then got killed, of course, in 1964. He wrote Zionist Logic, which was about the logic of colonialism and Zionism clearly as a part of the project. But when I saw that mattered enough, apparently, for Sam to put as a myth, or people like Sam, I'm going to use him as an avatar. Again, I don't have anything personally against Sam.
Yeah.
I said, he's a victim of his own eloquence. He has this style that's very captivating, and he's very popular because of it. So he's like an avatar for a way a lot of people think in that world and in this world. But the fact that he needed or felt he should put that in there, that this is a myth, I was like, that's really good, because he must, or his wife, whoever wrote it, must know that that's a bit of a moral problem. Because if it's a
Yeah.
colonial project of some sort, you're admitting that the Palestinian cause, love it, hate it, everything you just said about Hamas, whatever, how they attempt to resist it, is a resistance act, an anti-colonial resistance act, which has kind of an undisputed moral sort of high ground to it. You might
Yeah.
lose that
Well,
high ground with
historical
how you,
precedent too. Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so that one was the one where I was like, oh, like they kind of need this. And this is not true of all of the people in that world. And probably the only thing, if there's something splitting someone like Sam, or maybe some of the listeners who still find me and write me these messages, who consider themselves not right wing or not conservative, but certainly Zionist. Maybe they think they're utilitarian. They're just reasonable, rational people. They're not. They hate Trump. The thing that separates them, I think, from someone like Douglas Murray, who is just very much a conservative, is
Yeah.
Douglas just rolled his eyes at everything I just said because he doesn't care that it's colonial. And there are people like this who are like, colonialism was a good thing. This is a battle of civilizations in the world, and it's kind of a Darwinian thing, and we just have the right ideas. And that's all colonialism was. We brought civilization to those, poor mongrels in Africa, and, the
Yeah.
Indians
Yeah.
should thank us for this. That might be a bit of a caricature, but it's alive and well in the conservative
Mhm.
mind through other means. Or you have sort of a Thomas Hobbesian philosophy where you construct this giant leviathan that just has to control the world, and we have to obey it, and this is the best of all possible worlds, and we just have to deal with this thing. But that's the thing that if there's an ounce, a sliver of an escape route for some of these people, it is that one, that this is a colonial project. I think the best understanding of it is, while the whole world was at least morally going this way of anti-colonial, deconstructing the overt colonialism of the pre-World War II, World War I era, there was this one little project called Israel, which was going in the other direction in a very strange way, and it was able to do it from, a lot of accidents of history. And that's why it is such a lightning rod for protest, and such a lightning rod for people waving flags who it's insane to call them all anti-Semitic. This is much, much more about
Yeah.
the morality of anti-colonialism and everything that means than the hatred of the Jews. And I don't doubt that hatred of Jews obviously exists and can happen and whatever, but it's not some supernatural devil. They have to get over that. That's the ideology. That's the religion that they have to pierce, or else they're
Yeah.
just as radical as everyone else in the world.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I actually didn't know that that he had I haven't seen the
Yeah, I'll
five
put it
minutes.
up. It was
Yeah.
one that I know. Just to add one more note, it was the one that I know that Sheryl Sandberg immediately reached out and was a fan of, and then made her very, very, very harmful documentary propaganda. Anyway, yeah, no, he's
Yeah.
it's the only reason I talk about these people still is a million plus listeners who are, and they're hugely influential in pretty elite, rich circles in California as well. So yeah,
No. I think, yeah, I think this the conflation of, and it is again also complicated. Again, where I grew up, there was I started my book with a story when
yeah,
I was in fifth grade. We made paper snowflakes, and I was in the American school, and the guy from the Ministry of Education came and cut one of the tips off each of the snowflakes because anything six-pointed, even a snowflake, well, there's
yeah,
not a lot of snow in Saudi Arabia, but and anything six-pointed, like a six-pointed star, Star of David was just banned. And that
yeah,
was my introduction to Judaism when he came in, and we just thought, we're like, whoa, they're trimming snowflakes. This must be really, really bad.
yeah,
So yeah, that was my introduction to it. And I was in an American school. So we had to, and I feel bad for the teacher who had to explain to us, what it was, what the
yeah.
Star of David was, and that whole thing. So, I grew up there, and this is one of those things where there are two things that are true, right? There, yes, it's a colonial project. Yes, it's been extremely unjust to the Palestinian people, um, who have been shunned not just by Israel, but a lot of
Yeah.
their fellow Arabs and pretty much everybody. Um, and it's probably one of the most it's still the one injustice, like mainstream injustice, that just moves everybody because
Yeah.
it feels so out of place in the 21st century. The fact that this kind of thing is still happening and it's being done by a supposedly a Western style secular democracy, or whatever it is. So that's that's true, but it's also true that there is rabid anti-Semitism, that a lot of these opportunists who really, really don't like Jewish people and who are genuinely anti-Semitic, and you see them, like, there's a lot of Christian nationalists who are
Yeah.
extremely anti-Semitic. We've been seeing a lot of Dan Bilzerian and all of his posts, which are anti-Jewish. I mean, they're not even. He talks about the Jews in America and everything. There's rampant and anti-Semitism everywhere still, and it's a real thing. And unfortunately, the conflation of this,
But
being
yeah.
anti-Israel with anti-Semitism actually really diminishes what people who are on the
Yeah.
receiving end of genuine anti-Semitism, what they actually go through, because it still is one of the most common hate crimes. I mean, I was in a
Yeah, but
during
I just, I
yeah,
mean, I have to push back. First of all, the hate crime statistics, maybe the hate crime statistics, but the ADL statistics are notoriously BS, and they
sure.
and they do, but because and this is an impossible test to offer, uh, and they've made it impossible. Is I don't doubt what you said that it's really there, but if you
Yeah.
gave all of those anti-Semites a genuine choice to hate either Israel or Jews, if you gave that to them somehow by splitting these things evenly, and then there's
Yeah.
Jews who tell me, well, you can't do it, which one would they choose? And I think those numbers plummet to a significant degree. Not all the way. I obviously know that
Yeah, no,
anti-Semitism is a phenomena that interplays with the death of Jesus in the Christian community and a
Mel Gibson.
million different
Yeah.
things. And then, but I also want to put this out really specifically. There's this tragedy of anti-Semitism that people should also understand, and its interplay. That sort of it's a vicious cycle. So, for example, around the time of the World Wars, and the backdrop of Herzl and his Zionist project from 1897 onward was, of course, a European continent that was about to explode because you had empires bumping into each other and running up massive debts and getting into military conflicts. It was going to explode. And this nationalism fervor was everywhere. And there was many groups, ethno groups, religious groups, whatever, who could see the writing on the wall that this was going to get bad and probably would have loved a lifeboat, the way that Zionism was not super unique in that regard. But there was this unique factor about particular Zionists. They weren't even Zionists, Jews, Jewish families, because of the anti-Semitism and persecution that they were receiving. And while these European, a lot of Christians were fighting with each other, whatever else, in these places, Jews were sort of a second-class citizen, and they weren't allowed to participate in all civic aspects. They weren't able to hold all the same kind of jobs that everyone else held. One of the positions that they could hold was banking, which makes a lot of sense, because like if you and I hate each other, if we were both Christians and we don't trust each other, but we need to put our money somewhere with someone or some place that we know will keep it, because if they fuck around with it, they're second class, we could have them killed or we could bully them. And they're not going to cheat us because like I'm a little bit in charge. We kind of both give it to the Jews. And so the Jewish families, like the Rothschilds, this is when they made their empire, made a lot of money being bankers. Which also, if you're going to get involved in banking, and Balfour writes about this in his famous essay on Zionism, says you're going to end up getting involved in usury, right? You're going to end up giving loans out and taking interest, which is a very unpopular thing to do. So you have this double-edged sword that the persecution itself led to a situation where Jews started becoming, some Jewish families, extremely wealthy and a little bit hated and incredibly politically powerful. And so Herzl, right, is going to he's courting the Rothschilds to help fund this project. And so you have this, and it, I could talk about it all day. It works for some people, doesn't work for other people. There's a dispute within the Rothschild kids, whatever. They weren't the only Jewish family with money like this. But you can extrapolate this story to this conspiracy that Jews control the world and Jews have all the money and they're pulling strings behind governments and whatever. And really, it's basically a conspiracy about capitalism and wealth. But coincidentally, again, no fault of their own. Because of their persecution, they happen to be overrepresented as wealthy capitalists. So anti-Semitism is this like infuriating true, as like you keep saying, responding like a lot true, a lot untrue, like this true phenomenon based on a lot of exaggerated stories and things that then end up as like Jews are drinking blood or whatever to get rich. Like you get rumors through the mill and you get the blood libel and everything else, but you also have this situation where, just as an anecdote, I was in conversation with someone from the Israeli consulate who wanted to come on my show, and I said no, and I won't out him because I just didn't think it was worth it or anything. But then he sent me he's basically and I was very friendly, but in the farewell of sort of sorry that didn't work out, he sends me just so you know, the anti-Semites are raging and blah, blah, like an anti-Semitism screed that I should look out for. And then links to this tweet from someone who lists all of these companies owned by Jews. And that's what the tweet said. And I look at the tweet and I looked at all the companies and I was like, they actually are all owned by Jews, right? And so, but I don't doubt that the guy probably is an asshole tweeting, because why else are you going to do that? You're probably being an asshole. But people are pissed. They're just witnessing a genocide. And the fact that the Israeli consulate guy, it's that deep, that my whole point of going on that little maybe important rant about anti-Semitism is that blurred line I just gave you is so intentionally blurred that if I found that guy who sent the tweet and I set him aside and I was like, do you actually care about Jews, or do you care about wealth and controlling the money, and you think there's something up here? It's hard to parse all of these things, but history has put the Jew in this very strange position to have influence, have wealth, all this stuff, which is why when I was a kid, my family wasn't poor. I was around a kind of a lot of wealthy Jews, Ashkenazi Jews. I was desperate for them. I was like, you guys have power. You guys have influence, right? The money you give to your synagogue, the money that's going to Israel, you can swing elections. Wake the fuck up. And so that's why it's always been so frustrating, and why it also might explain why the Ashkenazi Jew perspective, which is my heritage or whatever, that I just sort of gave you of this story, I think is, I get a lot of Mizrahi Jews who give me shit for not representing their point of view, and I totally get it. They have a very different history than I just gave you. But this one, the Ashkenazi one that ends up basically in America in a lot of wealthy positions, has a ton of power and influence, and is a linchpin in a lot of the anti-Semitic fervor that and conspiracies and whatever else that you just alluded to, and why it's
Mhm.
really important to talk about it and talk about it honestly, right? So
Yeah,
that
no,
anyway,
that's it's good to hear that perspective, right?
yeah,
Because I mean, there's a side of it that you've been exposed to and you've looked at it critically. And from my perspective, I mean, you got like I grew up Muslim, right? And
yeah,
brown. There's if people want to come and confess their anti-Semitism to anybody, like, and I'll tell you, like, I did my residency in upstate New York, Buffalo. There are I'd see, white Christian people, almost always conservative. I'll say, I mean, Buffalo's upstate New York's pretty conservative.
yeah,
That's a conservative part of New York State. So I'd hear them, talking. We'd be out and be an event and just talking openly about, just shitting on Jews. I was like,
yeah.
yeah, they did this, they did that. I mean, not they killed Jesus or anything. Yeah, they control all the
They
Kanye
think they
stuff.
could tell you safely because of
So I
yeah,
am the safe thing, and then they'd look at me, and I'm just. I guess they'd read my expression, and they're like, "What? Don't you guys think the same thing? Like just you guys?" And I was like, "Okay." So I've been on the receiving end of that. It's happened more than once.
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so the people do come and they will confess it to me, and I know that these guys are working with Jewish surgeons and other sort of like they have Jewish residents and everything, and some of them are friends of mine, and it's a you do witness those things. There's genuine anti, and this is not just, and it was kind of strange to see it in the US, and it's the one thing that I got, like at least my exposure to it is like I want to say there's a kind of envy that there is this
mm,
really tiny population around the world. It's never really been. It's always been sort of diasporic in nature. Everywhere they are, it's they and then half of them were at one point wiped out, um, and they have a disproportionate amount of Nobel prizes.
mm,
They're in the media. They have a tremendous amount of influence. They have, in politics and pretty much everywhere, banking and so on. So they have this. So how can such a tiny population, just a few million
yeah,
people, have it? Now, for the Muslims, it's 1.6 billion of them, the second largest religion in the world, like just many, many orders of magnitude more. There's, I think, maybe one or two science Nobel Prizes that have been awarded to people from Muslim backgrounds.
yeah,
There's this idea that I had this idea that Albert Einstein was only given the Nobel Prize because he was Jewish. It was a conspiracy, and it's all run by Jews. So there is this thing that they see, right? You have a very tiny population of people who have this disproportionate, outsized
yeah,
um, amount of success. So that can't be coincidence. That can't be anything. It can't be because of that. Like it's not like they can't be genetically superior to us. They can't be anything. There has to be a conspiracy. There has to be something out there. So they think that they're out to get everybody, and
yeah,
they think that there's a sort of a just you know all the stereotypes. So
yeah,
I do hear that. So some of that mainstream narrative is out there, and it's real. And the problem is, like when we had the whole conversation about Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate, I would talk. This idea that we should be sympathetic to Islam because Muslims are oppressed in the West, but even though, like in their own countries, the Muslims are oppressed by really Islamic theocratic governments, right, by the religion itself. And the most striking example of this was when, women in Iran were protesting against the
yeah,
hijab and they were taking it off and they're seeing their own liberal secular counterparts in the United States putting it on and
mm,
protesting and doing things that there's a disconnect. It's the contextualization of it is different in both places, but people take uh, advantage of that. And the real story is that, Islam and Muslim are two different things. Islam is,
yeah,
you know about this. We talked about this a lot. It's an ideology. Muslims are people. You have on the left, they would say, well, Muslims are a minority and we need to protect them. So whatever the Quran says, we can't insult it, we can't disagree with it, we can't challenge their ideas. And then on the right, they say, well, these ideas are terrible, even though now they align with all of them for some reason, right? These ideas are terrible, so that means that we need to ban these people, we need to stop them from
Yeah.
coming in the country, we need to, surveil all their mosques and all these things. So, but and both of those things are wrong, right? But whenever something like this happens, whenever you get an ISIS, there's you get people, like myself and like, some of the other people we talked about this, really Mariam Namazi, who I absolutely love.
Mm.
Um, a lot of this, really like now it's huge, this and mainstream, this ex-Muslim community. Um, they went out and they spoke out against it. But then there were all these people who genuinely were bigoted against Muslims. They hated Muslims, the people, right? Like
Yeah.
the Tommy Robinson type, that ilk. And they use that they exploited that. They kind of rode that wave to be able to justify their own bigotry and make it feel righteous. And
Yeah.
it's similar to, what happens with uh, a lot of anti-Semites, and it's not good for the Palestinian cause, which I am allied with.
Hmm.
Um, it doesn't help. So I noticed that especially with the stuff that I was doing, I think it was in 2014 or 2015 that Breitbart had a feature on me,
Mm.
right? They
Interesting.
wrote this
Yeah.
article about, and that's the first time I realized. I was like, oh wow. And then Facebook was the thing then, and
Mm.
I was getting all these commenters, and anytime I would write something critical about something in Islam, they'd come in, yeah, fuck all these Muslims, and
Yeah.
things like that. And then then I realized, I was like, wow, this is now I'm getting the support that I don't agree with. There are people who
Yeah.
are thinking they're riding this wave, and I got interview offers from like Glenn Beck and this thing called the Blaze here, and just
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
of the really right wing type things that wanted to sort of use me as a mouthpiece. I didn't go for it. I rejected it all. Um, a lot of other people unfortunately didn't. They saw that
Yeah.
as an opportunity, and they went in. But I just found it. So I saw that phenomenon on my side a lot, where uh, people were taking some my criticism of Islam uh, as a way for them to sort of latch onto what I'm doing and justify their bigotry and their whole
Yeah.
anti thing. And if I didn't agree with it, if I said, like, well, I don't believe in this, go, I don't
Yeah.
want your support. And it'd be like, oh, you're just a closet jihadist. You didn't mean anything that you said. Like,
Yeah.
that's not what I was saying. So I think there is there is something similar there. So,
Like you think I'll get offers from jihadist groups who hate Zionism? I mean, it hasn't happened
I
yet. Yeah.
no, that's not gonna hopefully not. And
Yeah.
the thing is, I was, I was aware enough, or I was at least clear
Yeah.
enough in what I wanted to do in the conversation. I wanted to have to shun that. Um, at first, I just ignored it, but then later on, I realized I had to actively
Yeah.
speak out against the anti-Muslim part of it, because now you had, Trump rising up, you had Muslim bans, and there was this, it became mainstream, and we went totally the opposite direction. There's an overcorrection, almost like to the extent I'll confess, it actually felt dirty.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes, even when I would make legitimate criticisms, all of which I stand behind, by the way, I think it's horrible. I think it's a horrible religion. I don't like any religion at all.
Yeah.
So I think yeah, I think I still think all of the same things I do, right, about the religion. Um, yeah, I just don't think it's I don't think it's as much of a threat as, for example, Christian nationalism right now in the
Yeah.
United States, at least, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well,
it's
to the Judaism thing, because I want to respond to
yeah,
some of what I know. Um, it's I mean, obviously from the beginning of this, and you mentioned at the beginning, Zionism has a lot of different, definitions. But this effort to split Zionism from Judaism as a religion, I think, is still important. But I think, the younger generation. This is something that Michael Sawyer said
Yeah,
to me.
it's very important. I think that's what I'm trying to. Yeah,
Yeah, and like they just know it. They can smell it. They can tell the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Where they're like, yeah, no, I know what I dislike. I know why I'm on the streets. Like, I'm not buying the slur anymore. I have no problem with my Jewish friends. And all the
right.
Jews who end up in those marches, do wonders for that cause as well. But the whole, to go back to someone like Sam, I remember he got a lot of shit when he interviewed Charles Murray, the famous statistician, whatever, who wrote The Bell
Yeah,
Curve, who waded into the very fraught waters of intelligence correlation with race. And that's like, once you talk about that, like, you're really going to get in trouble. And the
yeah,
defense to talk to these people was like, well, we're going to be mugged by reality, so we better talk about these things. And that's exactly what I was just trying to do with, like, am I supposed to pretend that nobody looks up how many Jewish CEOs there are? Or when they hear a politician speak and they're like, huh, I wonder, and then they go to Wikipedia. I know everyone's doing this.
right.
And I know they're gonna find, there's a whole lot of Jews who are, in really powerful positions. What the hell's going on here? And
Yeah,
to prevent them from jumping to the conspiracies of, like the ones you're talking about that I'm sure are rampant in a lot of these worlds, we need to be mugged by reality. What are the real reasons for that? And it's not some genetic superiority or whatever. It's the stories I gave you about wealth and, families having more privilege and being able to go certain places and whatever. Like, there are real reasons for these things.
there
And then, but the
there are,
most important, I was going to say, the most
yeah,
important
yeah,
aspect to that conversation is that intelligence or wealth or whatever has nothing to do with justice and injustice, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
nothing, right? Albert Einstein was a anti-Zionist who wrote the famous letter in 1948 warning everyone about Menachem Begin and calling him a Nazi. This isn't me. This is Einstein, right?
yeah, yeah.
And like, it has nothing to do with justice or injustice. And if I gave, someone a button right now that just gave, IQ is a terrible way to measure things, but let's imagine it's a decent one. And I had everyone's IQ in the entire
It's
world.
correlated with outcomes, so that's why it's
Yeah.
still legitimate, but it's
If I
not
gave you
comprehensive at all. It's
Yeah.
not comprehensive. But
But even if
yeah,
I had some sort of comprehensive, like, this brain can figure out whatever, a puzzle the quickest or
Mhm.
whatever, and some logical connections the fastest, and I gave you a button that said you can press this button and it will kill all the people on the bottom half of that spectrum, the world will just be, like, smarter the next day and better. Like, that's not
yeah,
a better world by any moral standard. And so it's just like a completely beside the point piece of argumentation. And so,
Mhm.
it just has nothing to do with what we ought to do and what ought to happen in
yeah.
the world.
And there are sort of other reasons for this, like you said, historical the thing you said about banking and how
Yeah.
uh, Jewish people got into banking and all of that. Is it so? That's something that I didn't know. I know that in Islamic history, for instance, Muhammad, when he went to Damascus to trade, and his first wife, who was 15 years older than him, right?
Mm.
She would send him there. Starting five, he mainly interacted with merchants, like trade. They were
Yeah.
Jewish,
There you go.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
in the Nabatean, that region, and he'd learn. That's how he learned about Abraham. That's how. I
Yeah.
mean, if you look at the Quran. Islam is basically just Judaism. I mean, it's
Yeah.
theologically, in terms of the stories, scripturally, it's essentially Judaism. But another thing that happened with Judaism is there is the sense of community eventually, like with Reform Judaism, eventually overrode the ideology aspect. So you have
Yeah.
people with all kinds of different ideologies and different levels of what they believe. There's certain traditions that still stuck. Your circumcision, the holidays, things like that. But ultimately, the community became there was a pluralistic element to it. There was a secular element to it that came in that did not happen as much with Christianity. It happened a little bit with
Mhm.
Protestantism and when the U.S. was formed. I mean, it's a so they did that too. And anytime a religion has done that, right, it has done better. So
Yeah.
whenever you had a religious history that did go pluralistic and somewhat secular, it became more community based rather than ideologically based. Um, they did progress. I mean, that's also an aspect because that opens up the way that you think about things.
Yeah.
Um,
What do you
in
think?
Islam,
Yeah,
Mhm.
yes, go on. Yeah, yeah.
No, no, go ahead. Ed, what are you going to say?
Well, I was going to say we should drive to our finish line, whatever that is. But I think I kind of want to try to drive to that finish line about the world we're in now, the post October 7th world, because I hope the genocide phase is over. I mean, if anything, and I will say this now. I'm again recording this on Friday, and anything could happen over the weekend, and things could happen quickly. But I hope there's not much mystery about the analysis of what happened in the last week of the ceasefire or in the last 2 years. Frankly, I hope there's not much mystery that what we've been saying all along is that an American president can stop this at any moment he wants, and basically
Right.
no one else in the world could. I think the efforts by something like the flotilla and the massive marches around the world here in Europe and elsewhere are a huge part. The pressure of just like we're gonna keep coming, we're not gonna stop. I think all of this has congealed to be this moment, including the thing you sent me with all the polling data. Let's not
Yeah.
forget that Hamas has its own. People think like they're totally immune because they're a jihadist group or whatever, which I would sort of disagree with that historical conception,
Yeah.
but they're whatever kind of group they are, that they're immune to like public persona or public image, or they don't care how many Gazans are killed. That's actually not entirely true. Their
Mhm.
numbers were waning to a significant degree about like how much support they had from October 7th. Um,
Yeah.
that we're at this moment now that we got and the Nobel Prize. I'm not going to underestimate the ego of Donald Trump, just
Yeah.
being like I need this to win. He
Owner
could
of the
still win
product.
it next year, by the way. So let's just hope we can dangle it another year for him. Um, but the world has changed. I think we all agree in a way that it's not going to go back. We've seen too much. The mythology of the morally superior liberal, maybe liberal, because I think people are starting to see the difference between left and liberal, but this morally superior Western enterprise that's all about democracy and peace or international law, that's the hypocrisy is gone, right? If that already wasn't gone after the Iraq war, like we're done with that. We're in a new world, right? And
Yeah.
so, how do you think? I mean, we're talking, which is what I wanted to do with you, talk a lot about identity and religion and our paths. How do you think? What do you think is going to happen now? You could talk about specifically Israel, Palestine, and that issue, because all of those countries that you spend time in growing up in, that
Mhm.
issue is a touchstone of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
an animating factor for so much, I would argue, of the religiosity that you saw that neither of us are a fan of. Like, I don't know if we're at the end phase of Israel apartheid and Zionism. I think we are. After
Mhm.
October 7th, my wife asked me how long. I said 5 years. We're 2 years in now. I think we're at a phase where that country can't hold together politically,
Yeah.
economically. Maybe not, it wouldn't survive maybe its own election, which is coming up this year, maybe a US election in 2028. I don't know. Like, how do you see that going
So,
there? And then maybe the ripple effects, and Iran as well.
like both acutely and chronically, speaking doctor speak, it's short term and long term. Like I
Right.
think that the thing that's changed massive. Listen, I grew up. I never heard anything anti-Israel. At that time, there was no internet. All of the news was people. Yet
Mm-hmm.
people curated letters to the editor, so public opinion was not really a thing that registered as much. People who wrote the news dominated it. There's nothing about Israel. There's no footage. Nobody knew what was going on in Palestine. You never heard their voices. Nothing. And the guy who changed everything, if there is going to be, and unfortunately, the an end to this whole idea of Israel, it's going to be because of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah.
This is a guy like during his reign started with broad bipartisan
Yeah.
American support. It was unwavering. You couldn't run for president in the US as a Democrat or a Republican, right?
Yeah.
And not support Israel unwaveringly, unconditionally. You couldn't do that. Okay, now he's got bipartisan opposition. Like Trump does not like Netanyahu. No, nobody, none of the conservatives. You've got people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's against him. A lot of, Matt Gaetz. A lot of
Yeah.
these really prominent Republicans, just despise the guy. Um, and then on top of this is so there's so many other things that have also sort of come into play. I just think that he's completely destroyed Israel as an idea, made it a total
Mm.
pariah. There's an entire generation of youth,
Yeah.
including Jewish youth. I mean, you got someone like Mamdani who says that he should be arrested and
Yeah.
it's a genocide, and he's gonna win. He's
Oh,
gonna be
easily.
the
Yeah.
mayor of New York, which has the largest population of Jewish people outside of Israel,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's really, really remarkable. That's a transformation I've just never seen. There's nobody in the younger generation that supports Israel right now the way that they did. The entire historical narrative has changed. We used to talk about the Holocaust
Yeah.
as the seminal event in the history of the Jewish people, where and for that you have this horrific footage. You have all the recordings from the Nuremberg trials. You have it's just I mean it's horrible, but it's black and white, it's grainy, it's sparse.
Yeah.
Um, and but now you have high res like 4K TikTok videos, thousands and thousands of them, one after the other, after the other, after the other, of kids with their arms blown up. Okay, like little kids, like things I wouldn't even show my
Yeah.
daughter in fiction. It's like when the stuff is in fictional stories, I protect my 9-year-old kid from it. And now there's like 9-year-old kids, and you're seeing their arms blown up, they're screaming, and their bones are jutting out, and they're getting operated on
Yeah.
without anesthesia. I mean, the entire thing. And
I'll
now
remind the audience that you're a doctor, and this must also be that what you just described is like a visceral medical situation that
I can't.
yeah.
Yeah, I did autopsies for 5 years. Okay, so
Nice.
I'm very used to seeing dead people, cutting them up, bring my all of that stuff. I did that for as a pathologist for a long time. I can't watch this footage.
Yeah.
It's impossible for me to actually watch it and stay sane. And now we have a younger generation that we say are overprotected, oversheltered, and everything. So you oversheltered and overprotected them, and now suddenly they're seeing this footage and they're seeing it every day, and they go to their parents and they tell them, they're like, what is this? What is this? Why is Israel doing this? And their parents are like, well, no, they're
It's
defending themselves,
complicated. Yeah.
human
Yeah.
shields. And, it's like, we got to kill them because they're terrorists, or we got to kill them because they're human shields. Like, either way, you got to kill them. Those are the two options of what Palestinians are. So you're seeing this, and then these kids go to their parents, and their parents were civilized, educated, always taught them about justice and, blah, blah, blah. Now they're saying, no, this is somehow justified, and they're watching the footage and they're just like this world is broken.
Yeah.
Like there's so that the Netanyahu has completely erased for an entire generation the history of the Holocaust. He has created a new Holocaust,
Yeah.
right? Ultimately perception's reality. That's completely changed everything. On the political front, one more thing I'm going to say is
Hmm.
aside from that change, one huge change is the Middle East realignment. So the Abraham Accords,
Yeah.
right, happened. War and instability and all that stuff is not economically beneficial. I think we talked about it once before that, the European Union, then they finally went in and solved the Yugoslavia issue with NATO. They did it when, the European Union was coming together, the euro currency was going to
Yeah. Yeah.
launch. The political instability is not good for economics, and the world runs on economics now, right? So these economic alliances between Saudi Arabia and Israel, the UAE and Israel, like, these are important things to the United States. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, um, the UAE, these are much more important to the United
Yeah.
States right now than Israel. Israel is they give Israel money to protect their, military aid and all that stuff. With Saudi Arabia and everything, Saudi Arabia has if they Saudi Arabia has hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars invested in the U.S. economy. And there's
Yeah.
say that people say they own a part of the U.S. GDP. That's not true, but not technically true. But I mean, there's just a lot more transactional benefit to the U.S. just strategically with the Saudis and with these Arab countries, and the people in these Arab countries are coming out and saying that's why these the Arab countries have helped broker the
Yeah.
ceasefire.
Yeah.
So Netanyahu has just destroyed it. So he's not going to have the kind of political backing that he did at the start of his thing. The bipartisan support has gone to like pretty much just veering toward bipartisan opposition. He's not going to have the political financial sort of loyalty from the United States. And if we have a democratic government that comes in the U.S. after this, it'll be even worse for him. His own people are like, they want to throw him in jail, and he's just destroyed just decimated the idea of Israel as
Yeah.
a state that was born out of oppression. He's completely just absolutely destroyed that for an entire he's rewritten the
Well,
history of
yeah.
Israel for an entire new generation. And
What's
I'm
interest yeah, what's interesting about Netanyahu, just thinking maybe historically, is I want to say, like, his father was in an office and studied under Jabotinsky, which is a he wrote the Iron Wall, very specific form of revisionist. It's called Zionism, the most militant, kill 'em all Zionist kind of attitude. That's
right.
Netanyahu's school, right? And the Likud, his party, what it comes from that school. And of course, there's other forms of Zionism, as you said, that try to sort of give birth at different times. And the word is still this stubborn word that people want to use to just mean like it just means Jews have a safe place in their homeland or something like this. So if there's anything that is interesting about this is that Netanyahu has tried to carry that mantle, the Jabotinsky revisionist Zionist Iron Curtain mantle,
Mhm.
into the real world as the warrior state, the Sparta state full of warriors who just are constantly ready to be at war, and that's the only way to stay safe. And this is what it's, I think, inevitably always led to, right? Like there was no way to have that ideology in place without the occasional revolt from Palestinians, as you've mentioned, not always in this Al-Aqsa flood way, in various forms of resistance that are always a problem for this project. And I did a conversation with Richard English on his book Does Terrorism Work? And I think in this
Yeah,
like and he had the what's interesting is that I'm going to say like ultimately no, like on the very long term it doesn't work, but it does have these short-term victories. Israel itself is one of them, as he argued, that the terrorist groups of the Irgun and the Haganah or whatever, you could argue the establishment of the state of Israel was one of the most successful results of a terrorist campaign of all
of
time.
terrorism. Yeah, it was born out of
Right.
terrorism as well. A lot of people don't
Yeah.
know that. So
And what Hamas did, I also, the one that I think connected with you the most was my
do
essay
you
on Do You
condemn
Condemn AI?
Hamas, Jay?
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
condemn Hamas?
Yeah,
There.
I think what I said is go watch my video. It's 20 minutes long. If not, I say I can't say yes, but if you want to know why. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's the video that I think also touched you in a lot of ways of like trying to walk through that philosophically. Um, in this long, if the goal in some way, and we could have gotten, we should do this again, by the way. We used to do much more of these
Yeah,
political
got it.
things, and we should just do like a regular, because they're fun to prognosticate and you're a good an analyzer of things. But we touched on the sort of believing people at their word or believing poll results, and my frustration, to go back to the crowds we used to run in of Sam and all those, is they just completely erase psychology, right? They take people at their word. They say this, they're going to do it. That's what I believe. And I'm like, do you have to weave in some psychology into this? And as you mentioned, cognitive dissonance, which is a huge part of my book, of all of the reasons that we lie, and we lie to ourselves and all these kinds of things. And the if there, I know what Hamas says, right? Like I'm going to get the Zionists hounding me, being like, they say, oh, they want to exterminate all the Jews and they're genocidal. I get it. I get this, and they've done, I think, well to try to revise that at times. They're the ones who revised their charter, not the Likud. But if part of their goal was to do this event of October 7th for a lot of reasons, but partially to do what you just said was a success, to show the world what their enemy is it's really perverse. I get that this is sick, and I'm not endorsing violence or whatever, but
Yeah.
it's to provoke your enemy so they reveal themselves to the world, and then you catch them on camera to be like, and then get it out to the papers to be like, see, I told you what I'm dealing with. I know what I did was a little fucked up, but like, do you see why I did it? A lot of people are thinking that way, right?
Did you see the interview that I think I can't remember his name, Ghazi something that Hamas official did with CNN recently?
No, not with CNN. Maybe I've
So
seen a lot. Scahill's been the
that
best at interviewing these guys.
yeah,
Like,
he said so they asked him and he called it a golden moment. He said
right,
when they
like
talked
yeah,
about yeah, when you talk about October 7th, I mean he said essentially he's like October 7th, it happened. There were like so many tens of thousands of people killed.
yeah.
Do you think
Not 10
he's like
on that day. Yeah, it was like
yeah.
1,200 people. Anyway, and Israel killed most of them
No,
at
no,
their time. Go ahead.
sorry. I mean after in the war,
Oh,
like
after. Yeah, 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 yeah,
in the
yeah,
response of tens of thousands of people killed and Palestinians killed in the
yeah,
response, and they asked him if it's worth it. He's like, well, we are in a quote golden moment.
yeah,
The entire world after 77 years, we've never seen this. The entire
yeah.
world has completely changed the way that they're looking at Israel. And I gotta say, Hamas needs to they need to send a thank you card or maybe a jet like the Qataris did to the Trump. They need to send one to Netanyahu, right?
Netanyahu did it for
There's
them,
no-
right? Yeah, I just want to. This is so important what you're
yeah,
saying, and this is really taboo stuff, but it's right, and we have to have kind of the courage to talk about it. Not that like
yeah,
we
yeah, yeah,
endorse it. Like all of this was unavoidable, and but like what's interesting and what I think people's thinking is ringing hollow is that when people started talking about the two-state, acknowledging the Palestinian state at the UN or whatever, and the Israel response was you're rewarding terrorism, and everyone's
mhm,
like that your
yeah,
state is a reward for terrorism. Like, come on, we
yeah,
know
yeah.
we know the history, or we've learned the history, and what are we supposed to do about what you've been doing there? Like, it's not a really good argument of like you're rewarding
Yeah, and it
terrorism.
also
'Cause I
does the
don't,
whole pro conflates pro-Palestinian, pro like it's just it drives me
yeah,
insane.
yeah, and so, but like, do I think that I'll give you another important reference here because now I've mentioned I think Ghassan Kanafani like on every conversation here just because I think he's good and I'm not going to apologize for it. People always are like, oh, he supported the Lode
Yeah,
massacre or whatever, which he didn't. He was just part of the PFLP. They all got
yeah,
killed and they were all involved in this thing. They certainly were in favor of armed resistance. And importantly, to the Zionists listening to me out there, his enemies were not just the Zionists, as he called them, and the imperialists, and he connected it to global capitalism, but the reactionary Muslims. He said it, right? They were at war with the king of Jordan, who was opposed to them, and becoming the exact kind of jihadists and Islamists that you say you hate. Like, this is your guy. And in this
yeah.
famous interview he was doing, I forget who was interviewing him, maybe for a French paper or something. It was The Sword in the Neck. It's a famous interview, but I'm going to paraphrase it here, and then maybe I'll just show the clip. The guy's asking him basically why he keeps doing this because it's so dangerous. Like, why don't you guys just? It's kind of that like, why don't you just give up, right? Like, why don't you just settle here and chill out? Like, why do you keep doing this? It's super deadly, and he says, and you're going to end up, putting a lot of your own people in danger or kill them or whatever. And this is a far cry from Hamas. This is like small beans at the time. And
Hmm.
he said, he said basically like, is it worth it to you? He was sort of shrugged, and the guy is like, it's better than being dead, isn't it? And he goes, maybe to you, but to me, it's not, right? He's like, I want my freedom. And I think what's underneath that is a massively complex, difficult conversation, one I've just been trying to philosophically broadcast for 2 years now, sometimes more
Yeah,
overtly than else, about that relationship between violence and liberation. So what my whole Malcolm X episode was about, that I just loved with Michael Sawyer, is that. And this conception of freedom, which is philosophically such a difficult, crazy conversation and
yeah,
idea that everybody existentially wants. In my philosophy, of course, I think everybody's existentially afraid of in some ways. This is my favorite thinker, Eric Fromm, with escape from freedom and fear of freedom. It's the most complex thing. It's the thing everybody's striving for. No one knows how to get. No one knows when they even have it, but they want it badly. And my takeaway from it is genuine, true freedom. I don't think it's living in a surveillance state where there's never any violence and you're not allowed to
no,
question anything, which is absolutely the Leviathan that many of the thinkers of the Sam Harris ilk would absolutely usher in.
Yeah.
willingly or not. They, it's a pure sort of safety world, that is not, and it's the utilitarian mistake of measuring freedom as peace, where I'm like, justice,
No.
the true pursuit of the conditions of justice is the quest of
Oh,
humanity, and that's
yeah.
the freedom quest. And to your point that you mentioned way back before, unreachable. I fully admit that you'll never fully arrive at it, and the
Yeah.
and the human condition of chasing freedom is an eternal Sisyphusian chase of trying to achieve justice, which is unachievable. And that's the game of politics, of how the past ought to relate to the present, which can never fully align, but we always should be chasing it. And the answer is not. And to one more time with Sam, because he finally admitted, and this is when I stopped bugging him, is when he wrote an essay saying that he thinks that history is irrelevant. And I was like, I can breathe now. He's admitted it. He said it. Because if your answer is, well, I can't solve this moral dilemma of justice, so just
Yeah.
erase history and pretend it doesn't matter, is the same act of erasing psychology. It's
Oh,
inhumane, and it will
yeah.
result in a false version of flourishing. And so, just to wrap up that point, on to bring it to this like Hamas thing, I don't know how to tell other people how to fight for what they think is freedom, and I don't know how to tell Ghassan Kanafani how to fight for it. I don't know how to tell a slave not to revolt or anything. I do know it can be manipulated. To your point about religion, religions are famous for inflaming and glorifying victimhood narratives to the point where you think you're always injusticed. That's
Yeah.
Judaism and Islam to an extreme degree for both, I think. Um, but that's the quest. And if you fight for it, this is the Martin Luther King response to Malcolm. If you fight for it using violence, the question is, does it poison the well of the freedom that you'll win or
Yeah.
achieve? And I think the answer is ultimately cosmically yes. And that just might be a forever recycling, flushing our old failure, because the flourishing is hollow, because I know I got here by a genocide or stepping on someone to get here. And so, that's just my pitch of like where we're at the moment, and my longest philosophical deciphering of something like Hamas as a liberation movement, right?
Yeah. I, and like I said, I know it's such a cliche to say these things are complex, but I think we went through a lot of that conversation, like
Yeah,
with the way that the people think, the leaders that they support. Even this idea that, and I'm actually just, it's very un-Sam like to my mind to say that,
mm,
history is irrelevant, and that's just not what I had expected,
yeah,
something like that to say. But if you, but there's one thing that he said in the past that I found the most compelling thing. He's like, when you have reason, when you provide a reasonable argument, then people will helplessly come to that. I agree. And I do think there's something to that in the long term, like very, very long term trend lines. But one thing that I've learned, at least since, Donald Trump came in, and you have all of these sort of ethno-nationalist weird movements happening, and many of the sort of secular rational people have gone ahead and started subscribing to that. And like you said, intelligence really doesn't have anything to do with it. That it's not about, it's just not about rationality and reason.
oh,
It's about our inherent biases, how we grew up. Someone like Maajid Nawaz, he had a radical mindset when he was in jail in Egypt, with Hizb ut-Tahrir, and then he became sort of like equally passionate, equally sort of like radical. I mean, you hung out with him in
yeah,
person. You don't have so when he did this whole reform thing, and now he's gone to the whole conspiracy side, and he's similar thing. He's the other author of the book Islam and Future Tolerance in your documentary. So there's a people do have certain proclivities, certain personality types are coming from different places. Someone like Yasmin Mohammed, for instance, who, we co-hosted a
yeah,
podcast together for 2 years, right? And then we kind of fell out, which is unfortunate. But in her case as well. I mean, she had a very, very different experience.
yeah,
Religion. Someone like her, Ayan Hirsi Ali, like they had a different experience too, and they're not they when you come at something from the driven by the pursuit of justice, you have a very different way of uh, the sort of going about it than if you come at it from the pursuit of truth. Okay, the pursuit of truth is a little bit more dispassionate. You know, you look at
Yeah.
your personal experience, of course, is going to color it in some way, but you're going to try to avoid the cognitive dissonance as best as you can. You're going to try to apply equal sort of like standards to everything. But, you know, when you're coming from a justice point of view, there's an emotional element to it that can color things.
Yeah.
So you see, and I don't know, I think it's interesting. It's complicated. I've learned a lot in the last 10 years just about how um, different people think. That Yuval Noah Harari is just, you know, his everything that he wrote to me makes a lot more sense. That everything is really about storytelling.
Hmm.
So a human
Yeah.
being.
There's a lot of personally I disagree with him about, but that thesis I
Yeah,
think is
I do
fine. Yeah, yeah.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
100%. Like I do too, but there's a lot. I think this idea about storytelling
Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
people, that's what really how you tell the story is really the kind of we all have certain influences and biases that you may not even be aware of. So,
Yeah. No,
but I don't
justice
know.
is a feeling and justice is a story to be told. Justice can't be measured, which is why it gets
Yeah,
sidelined in the utilitarian conversations or the rational conversations.
yeah,
You can't measure it, and I can't tell people how to get it. You can only kind of know it when you have it, and that makes it this very frustrating thing. But I'm sorry, like that's the human condition, and that's what we
yeah.
have to go after. But to like a punctuation mark on my last rant about violence and liberation, I wanted to make the point and drive it home of like the the fact that Zionism of the kind that Netanyahu it has come to define, frankly, from the start, from Jabotinsky all the way till now, was the dominant thread of Zionism, of Netanyahu's Zionism, is violent. And it did poison the seed, and it can't hold. And it was going to collapse of its own moral inconsistency and hypocrisy. Obviously, the people whose necks it was stepping on, from Ghassan Kanafani all the way to today, were going to help it collapse as best they could, which is, I think, the process we're seeing.
Yeah.
But I'm not trying to contend that the Palestinians have some perfect ideal society waiting to step in and build there. No, this is an ongoing cycle. But this cycle of Zionism, really, as you've said, it's over. The public opinion totally dropped out. To just wrap it up on our sort of prognostication of it, I do fear, though, I want to say this. It was really good analysis that I totally agree about the Middle East countries and their importance to America, which
Mhm.
wasn't exactly the case in 1948, right? I
No.
think telling the long version story of Israel is 1948 to 1967, a little bit of a young, insecure nation kind of scraping by, doing what it can. 67 changed a lot, where it basically elevated itself to the battleship in the Middle East, to be America's henchman, to help you squash all of these nationalistic movements which threaten to, take the shipping lanes and the oil in this massively important area away from your sphere of influence, will be your bulldog in this area. And it elevated itself really well into that role. Iran is the one, of course, that got away, which is still what I'll get to. I think that has kind of worn out its welcome a bit because it was so successful to a degree, because America was able to secure, as you said, these dictatorships and monarchies that are somewhat stable, although the thing, and here's the, like through Qatar, through everyone else, including
Stable
Egypt,
because
right?
they're
What's
Yeah,
that?
go ahead. Sorry. I was
Yeah, no,
saying, I was just being a good play. I was saying that they're secure because they're dictatorships a lot of times.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. So the whole bullshit about
yeah,
American democracy, whatever, just look at the Middle East. But like, so Egypt was the perfect example where, Coleman was so confused by this, but he's like, why did Israel give the Sinai back? Wasn't that important to the religious Zionists? Well, sure it was. But as soon as Nasser was out of the picture, because Israel, did the preemptive strike in 67,
yeah,
and you had Sadat, who was a US puppet who was going to open the Suez Canal back to Western interests in Britain, of course you give the Sinai back, which of course there were some religious Jews
yeah.
who were pissed about, who were like thinking, I think Noah's Ark was supposed to like be on a hill in Mount Ararat there or something wild like that.
Well,
But
they want the Euphrates, the Nile. They
right.
want all of it,
But
right? I mean, those.
that exact story tells you all you need to know about
Yeah,
the type of Zionism that wins there, which is the Zionism that's hitched to colonialism and Western interest, more so than the sort of Greater Israel. Of course, the Greater Israel thing's a project, but I always do, even though I grew up hearing some of it, try to say, like, I think it's much less of a force. It's a force that's going to tear it apart, but less of a force than the sort of colonial project force. But all of that being said, the US did secure these relationships that they feel somewhat secure by. The thing that threatens all of those relationships is the Palestine issue, really, because that animates the Islamist and pseudo-jihadist uprisings in all these countries, like the Houthis, whatever, that the West can point to being like, aren't you, I know you don't love dictators, but the alternative is those crazy guys. Do you want them to take power of this country? And somehow democracy is just off the table. You only get the choice between the Shah and the Ayatollah, and we just forget that Mossadegh existed and we couped him. But so that entire situation has been this controlled chaos game that Israel has played that I think Hamas has ended with this project morally to a degree and pushed the cards into the table. But just to where I think what's so scary about this is that Israel knew this wasn't secure forever, right? This was a project that they were feeling, oh, cool, we're on America's good side. We get all the aid. We'll be the warriors for them. We have mandatory, military service, and all you Jews in America just do the PR for us. That was literally them saying that kind of stuff, right? That I think they knew that was going to run out, especially if America got too secure.
Yeah.
So things like developing the nuclear weapon secretly, which pissed off JFK to the point where maybe it got him killed. If you follow that whole story with Israel, wasn't supposed to have a nuke. They still haven't admitted they have a nuke, but we know they have a nuke.
They still haven't
because of the Dimona reactor, right? And they have this Samson idea where if they're going down, they'll nuke the whole world. Like, just as an anecdote, my mother, who grew up with so much of this and has struggled to a degree with some of it over the last 2 years, in one of her vulnerable moments when we were sort of arguing about this when I was with her home in Florida, and I was like, if Israel's going to go down, like, they're going to blow up the whole world. And she was like, they're going to nuke the whole world. And she's like, I know them. And I'm like, do you think that's worth it? And she thought about it and she was like, yeah. Now, perfect example of your family saying they would kill all the infidels, but not you. I don't know if push comes to shove, she would really support that, but people say things in this heated whatever. But that's the fear is that Israel brings the whole world down with it when it's going down, because they are a nuclear powered thing. And their last card left on the table, even for Netanyahu himself, we all know what it is war with Iran. Which there are people in the Trump administration who've been itching to do that. So I don't doubt that they will try to do that again in the next month or two. I hope the ceasefire holds. Obviously, there's a lot of fear that as soon as they get the hostages back, they go right back to it within a couple of weeks or whatever.
It's going to be a test,
Yeah, if Donald Trump had gotten the Nobel, maybe I would have said, but I worry he's either now thinking he's going to rip up, his plan because he didn't get the Nobel and power, or he'll say, hang on for one more year, it's yours. So, You could have the last word.
Unfortunately, I gotta go. I want to, but
me too.
But you got to see the way that the guy who handles Trump the best is Mark Carney, or the Canadian Prime Minister.
Okay.
You got to see some of his clips, when he sits down and talks to him, and it's just the shit sandwiches. The way that he gives him the flattery and then also counters it. But it's the guy, he has it down to an art, and I was very impressed with the way he does it. It's infuriating some people. It's like, oh, why is he sort of like? But he does it right. Balance that the exact opposite is Zelensky. But that's something.
Well, speaking of that, because I'll probably release this one like Monday, and then the next day I'm going to release the one about professional wrestling, which is a lot about.
Yeah, let's do that. That'd be cool.
Oh, it's great. It was a conversation with Paul Jay, and I go through the whole argument that the president of the United States is not Donald Trump, the man. It's Donald J. Trump, the character who played himself in the WWF, and it's spot on. And I'm glad Hamas has finally maybe figured out in the Palestinians how to play the card. I think everyone knows how to play it now. But yeah, this was fun. Hopefully, just sort of a lot of stuff.
There's a lot more. I think like after this ceasefire, let's see what happens on Monday when the hostages come back, and then let's do it again. This is there'll be lots to talk about. And I don't normally do these kind of just like reaction, like off the cuff ones. So hopefully people liked it.
And then I should invite you on. I started a monthly membership thing where once a month I just do a hangout for memberships on YouTube, and like a bunch of people have signed up, which is really cool. If you're watching and you want to join, you should join. They're little like this, but I want them to be more interactive. So I'm going to do it on Zoom, but you should crash one of them one time as a special guest if you're interested. It's on the last Sunday of every month.
Yeah,
yeah.
I'd love
they would love to hear from you.
I love everywhere. Like I love talking to Jay. We always do it. We talk offline, online. It's always a blast. So
I'll preview this saying we basically do this privately, and I figured I should let the audience listen into what we're thinking. But this was awesome.